You saved consistently, your account grew. It still buys less than it did 2 years ago. You notice it in small places. The grocery run that used to land at $120 now clears $145 without adding anything new. Your salary adjusted, the numbers moved, the space they were supposed to create didn't. Individually, every piece checks out. Raises, interest, contributions, but stacked together, the outcome feels slightly off, like something is quietly leaking. Since 2020, the dollar has lost roughly 19% of its purchasing power. A $100 bill from 4 years ago now behaves like $81 in terms of what it actually brings back. At $85,000 a year, that's about $16,000 of working capacity that disappeared without a single line item showing you where it went. And the strange part is the discipline didn't fail, the structure did. You followed a sequence built on stability assumptions, steady currency, predictable inflation, compounding that holds its shape, and those assumptions have been shifting underneath the math without announcing themselves. The dollar isn't collapsing, it's adjusting. The US dollar index is sitting near 99 in 2026, down from the 108 range not long ago, while inflation moved from 2.4% toward 3% again, and that combination changes what saving actually means in practice. So the question isn't where money grows, it's what it's exposed to while it sits still. Because there's a difference between holding value and holding something that just looks stable while it's being repriced. And that difference has a name: currency drag. Currency drag sounds abstract. It isn't. It's the difference between what your balance shows and what it quietly stopped being able to do. You see it in small pauses, the moment before tapping confirm where you check the account again, even though you already know it's fine. The total fits the number, it just doesn't feel like the same number anymore. Since 2020, average wages in the US have risen about 2.4% after inflation. Inflation itself moved closer to 19% over that same window. On paper, income increased. In practice, the distance that income can travel shrank, and the gap isn't labeled anywhere you can point to. So you adjust. You cut here and delay there, move money into something that earns a little more. Individually, each decision is correct, but over time they start to resemble maintenance rather than progress, like keeping a machine running that isn't actually taking you further. Run that forward 10 years. A household putting away $8,000 a year, earning 5%, lands near $100,000 after a decade. If purchasing power erodes at even 3% annually, that same amount behaves closer to $74,000 in today's terms, which means a quarter of the effort never translated into usable capacity. And nothing broke, no crash, just a sequence of correct decisions interacting with a system that redefines the outcome after the decisions are made. You start to compensate without noticing, the late-night recalculation that doesn't resolve anything, the quiet shift from building to managing, optimizing numbers that keep changing their meaning underneath you. It begins to look like a path. Save more, invest slightly better, stay consistent longer, but that path assumes the ground under it is fixed, and the ground is exactly the variable that's been moving the entire time. The number in your account didn't lie. It just stopped meaning what you think it means. That gap between the number and its real-world reach is where the structure shows itself. You were told a simple chain: earn more, save consistently, let compounding handle the rest. It works cleanly on paper because the variables are held still. Income grows, returns accumulate, currency stays neutral. One of those variables isn't neutral. It's being adjusted in real time. And the adjustment doesn't show up as a deduction, it shows up as a shift in what everything costs relative to you. Since 2020, US money supply, M2, expanded from $15 trillion to over $21 trillion before contracting slightly. That expansion didn't sit in isolation. It moved through asset prices, housing, and goods, changing the baseline your money has to compete against. So the frame changes without announcing itself. You think you're storing value. You're actually holding something that's being diluted at a pace you don't control, while the things you want are being repriced against a larger pool of money. Picture a measuring tape that stretches slightly every year. You build a table that measures 6 feet. 10 years later, the tape says it's still 6 feet. The table didn't shrink, the unit did. Income follows one curve, asset prices follow another. The S&P 500 has roughly doubled since early 2020, while median household income hasn't kept pace at anything close to that rate. Housing makes it visible. In 2019, the median U.S. home price sat around $320,000. By 2025, it moved closer to $420,000, while mortgage rates climbed from 3.5% to above 6%, which changes not just price, but access. So the target moves faster than the effort. You're not chasing a fixed number. You're chasing something that's being actively repriced by forces that benefit from that repricing. And this is where the old frame breaks quietly. Saving was supposed to be a neutral act, storing today for tomorrow. It turns out to be a position inside a system where neutral doesn't exist. Because the system isn't built around preservation, it's built around flow. Money that moves, borrows, and scales through assets tends to stay aligned with the expansion. Money that sits tends to lag behind it. That doesn't mean saving was wrong. It means the definition of safe was narrower than the environment it was placed into. And the difference between those two definitions is where the loss accumulates. You feel it without naming it. The raise that didn't create space. The account that grew but didn't translate into optionality. And the strange part is the discipline still looks correct. Budgeting works, consistency works, but they're operating inside a framework where the outcome is partially redirected before it reaches you. So the question shifts, not how to earn more, not even how to invest better. It becomes something quieter. What exactly are you holding when you say you're saving? And who benefits from you holding it that way? Because that $100 from the beginning, the one that still says $100, is now sitting inside a system that treats it very differently than it did 4 years ago. And the part that changed isn't printed anywhere on it. There's a second layer to this. It doesn't show up in inflation or returns. It shows up in where your money is allowed to exist and where it isn't. Think of it like an airport moving walkway. You're walking forward. The floor under you is moving in the opposite direction at a speed that isn't posted anywhere. You don't notice it at first. Your pace feels normal. It's only when you look at where you expect it to be and where you actually are that something doesn't line up. That walkway is the currency environment. It shifts quietly. Inflation at 3% doesn't feel like movement, but over 10 years it compounds to roughly 34%, which means the ground you're standing on is moving backward that entire time. Now layer in behavior. You earn $90,000. After federal and state taxes, that's roughly $68,000, about $5,600 a month landing in your account. You follow a disciplined pattern. You set aside $800 each month. You place it into a broad market fund returning 6% annually after fees. 10 years later, the account reads about $130,000. The number looks correct. It aligns with every projection you were shown. Now adjust the unit you're measuring with. At 3% inflation, that $130,000 behaves closer to $96,000 in today's purchasing terms. Roughly $34,000 of what looks like progress is just the walkway moving under your feet. And that's before friction layers in. The average expense ratio across many retirement funds still sits around 0.4% to 0.6%. Over 30 years, that quietly removes close to 12 to 15% of total returns, even though it never feels like a decision you made. Then taxes. Long-term capital gains at 15% for this income range. If $40,000 of your gain is taxable, about $6,000 exits the system the moment you convert it back into usable money. So the clean projection, $130,000, compresses towards something closer to $90,000 in real spendable terms. Over a decade, on behavior that was considered optimal. Nothing broke, no bad timing, just a sequence of small extractions interacting with a moving baseline. This is how the walkway hides. It doesn't reverse your direction, it just subtracts from your velocity. Now extend the horizon. 30 years at $800 a month, same return profile, lands near $800,000 nominally. At 2.5 to 3% long-term inflation, that translates closer to $420,000 to $450,000 in today's terms. Half the outcome you thought you were building, not through error, through redefinition of what the outcome means. And there's another layer most people don't include: interest rates. Not the rate you earn, the rate the system runs on. Credit cards sit near 20% APR. Auto loans average around 7 to 9%. Mortgages moved from 3% in 2021 to over 6.5% in 2025. That shift doesn't just affect borrowing, it changes asset pricing, affordability, and who can access leverage, which means the same dollar competes in a tighter environment. So while your savings compound at 5 to 6%, the system extracts at double or triple that rate on the liability side. And those two forces don't cancel, they compound in opposite directions. Picture two clocks running side by side. One tracks your accumulation, the other tracks the cost of accessing the same assets you're trying to reach. They don't tick at the same speed, and over time they drift apart. Housing makes this visible again. A $350,000 home with 3% interest costs about $1,475 a month in principal and interest. At 6.5%, that same home costs closer to $2,200. Same asset, same price, completely different accessibility. So your savings target isn't fixed. It expands as financing conditions change, which means the finish line moves while you're still running toward it. And here's where the walkway analogy deepens. There are multiple belts. Currency erosion is one, fees are another, interest structure is a third. Each one moves independently. Each one is small enough to ignore on its own. Together, they define the actual direction you're traveling. You respond the only way that feels rational. Save more, delay purchases, optimize allocations. But those adjustments assume the system is neutral. It isn't. It's calibrated around movement, spending, borrowing, asset turnover, not static preservation. So holding cash becomes a position, a passive one, inside a system that rewards activity aligned with its own expansion. This is why the account can grow and still feel unchanged. The number increases, the distance it can move you doesn't. And the cost isn't loud. It's not a crash. It's the slow conversion of effort into something slightly less transferable over time. Run the arithmetic differently. At $90,000 income, saving $800 monthly is about 14% of take-home. Over 30 years, that's $288,000 contributed. Nominally, it becomes $800,000. In real terms, closer to $430,000. So $370,000 of perceived growth never translated into equivalent purchasing reach. That difference is time, years of work stored in a unit that kept shifting, not lost, just diluted. And the system doesn't need to hide this. It's visible in the data. Money supply, inflation rates, asset inflation, interest spreads, all published. But they're rarely experienced together. They're processed separately, so the pattern never fully forms. Until you look at the output, the account, the lifestyle it can actually support. And what this sets up in the architecture is the part most people stop right before reaching.
You didn't decide how to think about money. You inherited it. A set of default reactions that feel like judgment, but are actually just repetition. You check your account before spending. You look at the balance, not the structure behind it. You ask one question, can I afford this? And the answer ends the decision. That question feels responsible. It's also incomplete, because it measures the present number, not the path that number is sitting on. This is the default version running. Earn, save, stay within limits. Let the future sort itself out through consistency. And it produces stability. Bills get paid, accounts grow slowly. But stability inside a shifting system becomes drift, not visible in a month, clear over a decade. So the identity forms quietly. You become someone who is careful, someone who doesn't overspend, who plans, who follows the structure. And that identity feels earned, because it is. But it was assembled inside rules that weren't written for your outcome. Predictable behavior has value, not to you first, to the system that can model it. A saver is predictable. Cash sits. It absorbs the environment without pushing back. An investor behaves differently. Money moves. It aligns with expansion instead of remaining exposed to it. That difference isn't about intelligence. It's about positioning.
Where your money exists determines how it's treated. And the way you were taught to think keeps it in one place: safe, accessible, visible. All qualities that feel correct until you realize they map directly to the part of the system that moves slowest. Think of it like software. You're running a financial operating system installed years ago. It updates behavior automatically without asking if the environment changed. Inputs trigger outputs. Income comes in, a portion gets stored, a portion gets spent, and the system resets. No error messages, no alerts, just consistent execution. But the code wasn't written for adaptability. It was written for predictability. And predictability is easy to model, price, and extract from. Now take a single moment. Standing in line, you're about to spend $220 on something that fits your budget. The old process runs instantly. Check balance, yes it fits. Decision complete. There's no friction because the system only asked one question and it answered it. Change the question, same moment, same $220. At $90,000 income, your after-tax hourly rate is roughly $28. That purchase represents about 8 hours of your time, a full workday. Then extend it. $220 invested monthly at 6% over 5 years becomes about $15,300. The decision isn't just $220, it's a path that either compounds or disappears. That calculation doesn't feel natural at first because it isn't part of the installed system. It interrupts the automatic loop. And the discomfort shows up quickly, not in the math, in the social layer around it. You hesitate more. You decline things you used to accept without thinking. You start to feel slightly out of sync with people making the same income but moving differently. Nothing dramatic, just a small separation, a different pace in decisions that used to be automatic. And it's quiet. No one notices, except you. Because something shifts underneath the behavior. The number stops being the reference point. The system behind the number becomes visible. That's the moment that feels like clarity, not excitement, not relief. Just a removal of distortion. The same numbers, different meaning. You see the walkway now, not occasionally, consistently. You see where your money sits, how long it stays there, what happens to it while it's there. And the identity starts to feel incomplete. Not wrong, just built for a version of the environment that no longer exists. So the question shifts again. Not what should you buy, not how much should you save. It becomes quieter than that. What role are you choosing to play inside this system? Because staying the same is still a choice. It just doesn't feel like one. You don't need more information. You already saw the numbers. What changes is the frame you run the next decision through. The same $220 shows up again. Same account, same income. One version of you checks the balance, confirms it fits, moves on. The other version pauses a fraction longer, translates it into hours, sees where that money will sit and what happens to it while it sits there. Nothing external changes. Same job, same environment. Just a different arithmetic running underneath, one that doesn't assume the number is stable, one that accounts for the walkway. Over a year, it's small. Over 10, it separates outcomes. Not dramatically, just enough that the gap becomes visible. One path keeps optimizing inside the same structure. The other quietly steps outside of it, one decision at a time. Both feel normal while you're inside them. And the cost of staying isn't loud. At 3% erosion, every $10,000 held in place loses about $300 of purchasing reach per year. Not enough to react to, enough to accumulate. So the question isn't whether you understand this, it's what frame you're about to use the next time money moves through your hands. Because that moment, the one that feels routine, is the only place this ever actually changes.